Let me stay here, and I'll give you what no white woman can. The desperate black woman pleads through chattering teeth, her bare feet bleeding on the frozen porch as the towering cowboy looms in his doorway. The world sees her as nothing, a runaway, a burden, a woman destined to freeze nameless in the wilderness. But the bitter rancher, scarred by war and years of isolation, recognizes something familiar in her eyes, the look of someone with nowhere left to run. What he doesn't know is that sheltering her will unravel everything he believes about worth, about healing, about the secrets people carry to survive. She holds knowledge that could save his life, while he offers the protection that could save hers. But in a territory where prejudice runs deeper than winter frost, will their alliance destroy them both before they discover what they truly mean to each other? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. Winter gripped the Montana territory with merciless claws. Snow buried the world 3 feet deep, turning the wilderness into a frozen wasteland where only the desperate dared to travel. Caleb Stanton limped across his ranch yard, his left leg screaming with each step. 4 years since the Apache raid that ended his cavalry career. 4 years of isolation on 80 acres of bitter cold and stubborn cattle. The infection in his old wound had worsened again, turning the flesh around the scar an angry red that made him grit his teeth with every movement. He shouldered open the barn door, checking on his livestock one final time before the storm hit full force. The wind howled like a banshee across the empty plains, promising a blizzard that would trap him for days. At least he had enough supplies. At least he was alone, the way he preferred it. The sound reached him as he latched the barn door, footsteps crunching through snow, slow, uneven steps that spoke of exhaustion and desperation. Caleb's hand moved instinctively to the rifle hanging by his door. Nobody traveled in weather like this unless they were running from something worse than death. A figure emerged from the swirling white. A woman, stumbling forward with determination, accent that seemed impossible given her ragged appearance. Caleb stared down at her, his mind racing. Taking in strangers meant trouble, especially strangers who looked like her, in a territory where most folks wouldn't hesitate to string up a black woman found on a white man's property. The smart thing would be to point her toward town and close his door. But town was 15 miles through killing cold, and she wouldn't make it another 100 yards. Her feet were already frostbitten, leaving bloody prints on his porch boards. Whatever she was running from, it had driven her to choose death over capture. "What are you offering?" he asked, though he already knew his answer. No man could watch another human being freeze to death on his doorstep, regardless of the complications. "I can work. I can cook. I can tend your animals." She struggled to her feet, swaying but determined to show strength. "I can help with that leg that's giving you trouble." Caleb's eyes narrowed. How could she know about his leg? He hadn't been limping that obviously, had he? But the pain had been getting worse lately, making him favor it more than usual. "You know medicine?" he asked. "Some. Enough to help." The wind picked up, driving snow across the porch in stinging sheets. The woman shivered violently, her strength clearly fading fast. Whatever her story, she'd die if he left her outside much longer. Caleb stepped back and opened his door wider. "Get inside before you freeze solid." Relief flooded her face as she stumbled past him into the warmth of his cabin. The heat hit her like a physical blow, and she staggered before catching herself against his table. Her satchel never left her grip. The cabin was sparse but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, casting dancing shadows across rough wooden furniture. Caleb gestured toward a chair near the fire while he stoked the flames higher. "Sit before you fall down," he said. "I'll get you something warm." She settled into the chair with a barely suppressed groan, finally allowing herself to show weakness now that she was safe. Caleb heated water and found an old blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders before. "After that, we'll figure something out." She nodded gratefully, then looked down at his leg. "That wound is infected. I can smell it from here." Caleb stiffened. "It's fine." "No, it's not. You're favoring it badly, and the smell of sickness is strong. If you don't treat it soon, you'll lose the leg. Maybe more." Her certainty unsettled him. Most people wouldn't have noticed his slight limp, much less diagnosed infection by smell alone. Who was this woman? And what kind of knowledge did she carry in that battered satchel? Outside, the wind howled with renewed fury, sealing them in together until the storm passed. 3 days passed in uneasy coexistence. Zara recovered her strength while Caleb grew weaker. The infection in his leg spread like poison through his system, turning his skin hot and flushed. He tried to hide it, going about his daily chores with stubborn determination, but his condition worsened with each passing hour. Zara watched him struggle, her medical instincts screaming at the obvious signs of sepsis. His wound had begun to smell of rot, and red streaks crept up his thigh toward vital organs. Without proper treatment, he would die within days. She had the knowledge to save him, but revealing it would expose everything she'd worked to hide. On the 4th morning, Caleb collapsed while feeding the cattle. Zara found him face down in the snow, burning with fever despite the bitter cold. She managed to drag him inside, her small frame straining under his weight. His breathing came in short, labored gasps, and his pulse raced with the frantic rhythm of a body fighting for survival. She couldn't watch him die, not when she had the power to help. Zara retrieved her leather satchel from where she'd hidden it beneath her cot. Her hands trembled as she opened the worn clasps, revealing contents that would change everything between them. Medical instruments gleamed in the firelight. Bottles of carefully prepared medicines lined the interior pockets. And there, folded with precise care, were documents that could destroy her if discovered by the wrong people. She pulled out a surgical knife and a bottle of carbolic acid. Caleb's wound needed immediate attention. But first, midnight, his mind clearer than it had been in days. The excruciating pain in his leg had diminished to a dull ache, and he felt stronger than he had in weeks. He found Zara sitting beside his bed, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "What did you do to me?" he asked, his voice hoarse but steady. "Saved your life. That infection would have killed you by morning." Caleb tried to sit up, wincing as his treated leg protested the movement. "Where did you learn to do that?" Zara hesitated, knowing this moment would define their future relationship. "I studied medicine. Real medicine, not just folk remedies." "Studied where?" "Philadelphia. The Women's Medical College." The words hung in the air between them like a confession. Caleb stared at her, trying to process the implications. A black woman with formal medical training was almost unheard of, especially one skilled enough to perform surgery. "You're a doctor," he said, the statement carrying weight beyond its simple words. "I was, until I had to run." Caleb's eyes moved to her open satchel, taking in the professional instruments and official documents. Everything about her sudden appearance made sense now. The educated speech, the confident diagnosis, the precise way she handled medical procedures. She wasn't just some desperate runaway. She was a trained physician, forced into hiding. "The men chasing you," he said. "They want to take you back because you're practicing medicine." Among other things. Zara's voice carried years of accumulated bitterness. "Apparently, treating sick children without permission is theft when you look like me." Caleb understood the impossible position she faced. Her skills could save lives, but society would never accept a black woman as a legitimate doctor. She'd been forced to choose between using her training and staying safe. The fact that she'd chosen to help him revealed everything about her character. "Why didn't you tell me before? Would you have believed me? Or would you have thrown me out as a liar and a fraud?" The honest answer made Caleb uncomfortable. 3 days ago, shifted between them, creating a partnership built on mutual dependence and growing respect. "The folks around here," Caleb said carefully, "they wouldn't understand what you are. I know. That's why I have to keep moving." But Caleb was already thinking beyond immediate survival, seeing possibilities that hadn't existed before. His ranch sat far enough from town to offer privacy, yet close enough to serve families who needed medical care. With his protection and her skills, they could build something unprecedented in this harsh territory. The future stretched before them, full of dangerous opportunities. Spring transformed the Montana landscape from frozen wasteland to rolling green pastures. Caleb's leg had healed completely under Zara's expert care, leaving him stronger than he'd been since his cavalry days. The infection that nearly killed him was now just a memory, replaced by healthy pink scar tissue and full mobility. Their arrangement had evolved into something neither had expected. Zara remained at the ranch, officially as his housekeeper, but secretly practicing medicine on his livestock and the occasional neighbor who ventured by. Her veterinary skills proved as impressive as her human medical knowledge, saving 3 of his cattle from a respiratory illness that would have decimated his herd. Word began to spread among the scattered ranching families about Caleb's remarkable recovery and his cattle's unusual health. Neighbors who had barely spoken to the reclusive ex-soldier now found excuses to visit, hoping to catch a glimpse of the mysterious woman who seemed to work miracles. Tom Bradley arrived on a Tuesday morning, his face creased with worry. His youngest son had developed a persistent cough that kept the whole family awake at night. The boy was losing weight, growing pale and listless despite his mother's constant attention. "Heard your housekeeper knows something about healing," Tom said to Caleb, his pride clearly stinging at having to ask for help. "My boy ain't getting better, and the doctor in town is 3 days away." Caleb glanced toward the house where Zara was preparing her medical supplies. They had developed a system for situations like this. He would serve as intermediary, relaying symptoms and carrying treatments, while she remained hidden from direct contact with patients. Help for her husband's chronic back pain. Old Pete Garrison needed treatment for a hand injury that wouldn't heal properly. Each case demonstrated Zara's extensive medical knowledge, though always filtered through Caleb's careful explanations. Their secret practice expanded gradually, built on whispered recommendations and desperate need. Zara treated everything from broken bones to difficult births, always working through Caleb to maintain the fiction that he possessed some unusual healing ability. The arrangement satisfied her deep need to practice medicine while protecting her from exposure. She found herself happier than she'd been since medical school, finally able to use her training to help people who genuinely needed her skills. Their personal relationship deepened alongside their professional partnership. Long evenings spent discussing medical cases evolved into intimate conversations about their hopes and fears. Caleb's bitter isolation melted away under her gentle influence, while Zara discovered a peace she hadn't known existed. The first real test of their system came when Martha Hendricks arrived in the middle of the night, supporting her teenage daughter who writhed in agony from severe abdominal pain. The girl's symptoms pointed to acute appendicitis, a condition that required immediate surgical intervention. "She needs an operation," Zara told Calum privately. "Tonight, or she'll die." "Can you do it here?" "I can, but it's major surgery. If something goes wrong, if anyone finds out what really happened, we'll both hang." Calum looked at the frightened mother holding her dying daughter. "What choice do we have?" They converted Calum's kitchen into a makeshift operating theater. Zara worked by lamplight while Calum assisted, following her precise instructions to maintain sterile conditions and monitor the girl's vital signs. The surgery took 2 hours, her skilled hands removing the inflamed appendix with textbook precision. The girl survived, making a complete recovery that cemented Zara's reputation as someone with extraordinary healing powers. But the incident also marked a dangerous escalation in the complexity of cases seeking their help. Sheriff Avery Holt began asking questions around town about the sudden improvement in medical outcomes among the rural families. His suspicious nature was aroused by stories of miraculous healings and impossible recoveries sent a search party, planning to visit the ranch and conduct a thorough investigation. Word of the impending visit reached Calum through Tom Bradley, whose brother worked at the sheriff's office. "They're coming tomorrow," Calum warned Zara that evening. "Holt knows something isn't right." Zara began packing her few possessions, preparing once again to flee into the wilderness. But leaving meant abandoning the life they'd built together, the patients who depended on her skills, and the love that had grown between them. "There has to be another way," Calum said, watching her fold her medical certificates with practiced efficiency. "Not for someone like me. Not in a place like this." The sound of approaching horses echoed across the valley, arriving earlier than expected. Through the window, they could see Sheriff Holt and 2 deputies riding toward the house, their intentions clear in their determined expressions. Zara grabbed her satchel and headed for the back door, but Calum caught her arm. "Trust me," he said, his voice carrying conviction born of desperate love. The future of everything they'd built together hung in the balance as the lawmen approached their door. Sheriff Holt dismounted outside Calum's cabin, his hand resting on his gun belt. The 2 deputies flanked him as they approached the front door, their eyes scanning the property for any sign of the fugitive they sought. Calum opened the door before they could knock, his expression calm despite the tension crackling in the air. Behind him, the cabin appeared empty, no trace of Zara visible to the searching eyes of the lawmen. "Sheriff," Calum said with measured politeness, "what brings you out this way?" "Looking for someone, Stanton. A runaway woman from St. Louis, goes by the name Zara Bell." Holt's voice carried the weight of authority and suspicion. "Word is you might have seen her around these parts." "Can't say I have." "What's she wanted for?" "Theft. Practicing medicine without a license. Folks in St. Louis want her back real bad." Holt stepped closer, studying Calum's face for any tell. "Funny thing is, we've been hearing stories about miraculous healings happening around your ranch. Makes a man wonder." Calum shrugged, his demeanor unchanged. The hiding place on the property. Zara had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. After an hour of fruitless searching, Holt gathered his men to leave. "If you see this woman, Stanton, you send word immediately. There's a substantial reward for information leading to her capture." "I'll keep that in mind, Sheriff." The lawman rode away frustrated, but not entirely convinced. Calum watched until they disappeared over the ridge before calling softly to the storm cellar, hidden beneath a pile of hay in the barn. Zara emerged, her face pale but determined. "They'll be back," she said simply. "Probably, but we bought some time," That time ran out faster than either expected. 3 days later, a rider arrived at breakneck speed, his horse lathered with sweat and exhaustion. Pete Garrison's grandson had been kicked by a horse, suffering massive internal injuries that were beyond the capabilities of frontier first aid. But the real crisis came the following morning. Sheriff Holt himself appeared at Calem's door, not as a lawman but as a desperate father. His face was haggard, his usual commanding presence reduced to helpless panic. "My daughter Emma," he said, his voice breaking. "She's dying." The words tumbled out in a rush of paternal fear. Diphtheria had struck Cedar Ridge with devastating force, claiming the town doctor as its first victim. Emma Holt, barely 8 years old, was among the worst affected, her throat closing as the disease ravaged her small body. "The doc died yesterday," Holt continued, his pride completely shattered. "There's nobody else within 100 miles who knows how to treat this. But I heard about the healings that happen around here. I heard about miracles." Calem saw the terrible irony in the situation. The man who had been hunting Zara was now begging for the very skills he sought to destroy. "Sheriff, I don't know if I can help with something like that." "Please." The word came out as a broken whisper. "She's all I have left since her mother died. I'll do anything, pay anything, give anything to save her." Behind Holt's desperate plea lay the larger crisis consuming Cedar Ridge. The diphtheria outbreak was spreading unchecked, killing children and elderly residents with ruthless efficiency. This territory. Someone who actually knows how to treat diphtheria. The sheriff stood silent for a long moment, weighing his duty as a lawman against his love as a father. The choice tore at everything he believed about justice and order, but Emma's fevered face haunted his thoughts. "If she saves my daughter," Holt said finally, "if she can stop this outbreak, then as far as I'm concerned, I never heard of any woman named Zara Bell." It was a devil's bargain that turned the hunter into the protector, binding them together in a conspiracy of medical necessity and parental love. The true test of Zara's abilities was about to begin, with an entire community's survival hanging in the balance. The stakes had never been higher, and there was no turning back. Zara emerged from the house carrying her medical bag, no longer hiding behind Calem's protection. She walked directly to Sheriff Holt, her spine straight and her credentials visible on her person. For the first time since fleeing St. Louis, she presented herself as Dr. Zara Beaumont, licensed physician. "I can treat diphtheria," she said simply, "but I need guarantees." Holt stared at the woman he'd been hunting, seeing her now through the desperate eyes of a father, rather than the suspicious gaze of a lawman. "What kind of guarantees?" "No arrest, no harassment, no interference while I work." Her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. "I save your daughter and your town, and you forget about those charges from St. Louis." The sheriff's jaw worked as he struggled with the decision. Everything in his training told him to uphold the law, regardless of personal cost. But Emma's labored breathing echoed in his memory, along with the faces of other children already claimed by the disease. "Agreed," he said finally. "But if you fail, if my daughter dies, all bets are off." "Understood." They rode toward Cedar Ridge together, an unlikely trio bound by circumstance and desperation. Calem flanked Zara protectively, while Holt led them through countryside marked by the signs of spreading. Emma's condition was critical but not hopeless, provided treatment began immediately. "I need boiling water, clean towels, and every lamp in the house," Zara ordered. and I need everyone except my assistant to leave the room." Holt hesitated, reluctant to abandon his daughter to a stranger's care. "I should stay." "You should let me work. This procedure requires absolute precision." Calum gently guided the sheriff from the room while Zara prepared her instruments. The treatment for severe diphtheria involved creating an artificial airway to bypass the blocked throat, a delicate surgery that few doctors attempted even under ideal conditions. Working by lamplight, Zara made a small incision in Emma's neck below the obstruction. She inserted a thin tube that allowed air to flow directly into the child's lungs, bypassing the diseased tissue entirely. The procedure took 20 minutes of nerve-wracking precision, with Emma's life hanging on every cut. When it was finished, the child's breathing eased dramatically. Color returned to her pale cheeks as oxygen flowed freely through the artificial airway. The immediate crisis had passed, but recovery would take days of careful monitoring and treatment. Word of the successful surgery spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire. By evening, a line of desperate families had formed outside Holt's house, each carrying a sick child or elderly relative ravaged by the epidemic. Zara worked through the night, moving from patient to patient with methodical efficiency. She taught family members how to create steam tents that eased breathing difficulties. She prepared precise doses of medications that fought the infection directly. Most importantly, she identified which cases required immediate intervention and which could be managed with supportive care. Her medical bag seemed bottomless, containing instruments and medicines that most frontier doctors had never seen. Each treatment demonstrated the depth of her training and the quality of her education. By dawn, she had treated 37 patients, saving lives that would have been lost without her intervention. The transformation in community attitude was immediate and dramatic. People who would have crossed the street to avoid her now brought their children for treatment with grateful tears. Her race became irrelevant in the face of her obvious competence and compassion. Tom Bradley, whose bounty hunter who had accompanied Holt on previous searches, arrived that afternoon, expecting to collect his reward for the fugitive's capture. He found instead a community that had closed ranks around their healer. "She's under my protection," Holt informed him curtly. "Find another payday." The bounty hunter protested, citing the substantial reward and the legitimacy of the charges, but faced with a unified front of grateful townspeople and an armed sheriff, he had no choice but to retreat empty-handed. 3 days after beginning treatment, Emma Holt sat up in bed, asking for her favorite doll. The diphtheria outbreak had been contained, with no new cases appearing, and existing patients recovering under Zara's continued care. Cedar Ridge had found its doctor, and she had found her home. The town council meeting convened on a crisp autumn morning, 6 months after the diphtheria crisis had nearly destroyed Cedar Ridge. Mayor Harrison called the gathering to address a matter that would have been unthinkable a year earlier, officially appointing Dr. Zara Beaumont as the town's permanent physician. Every seat in the meeting hall was occupied. Families whose children Zara had saved sat alongside ranchers whose livestock she had treated. The faces that had once shown suspicion and hostility now reflected gratitude and respect earned through competence and compassion. "The motion before us is simple," Mayor Harrison announced. "Dr. Beaumont has proven herself beyond any reasonable doubt. She's saved more lives in 6 months than we lost in the previous 2 years to accidents and disease." Tom Bradley stood to address the assembly. "My boy would be dead if not for her. Same goes for half the children in this room. I don't care what some paper from St. Louis says about her. She's our doctor, and that's the end of it." A chorus of agreement rippled through the crowd. Martha Hendricks, whose daughter had survived emergency appendix surgery, nodded vigorously. Old Pete Garrison raised his healed hand in testimony to Zara's skill. Even the most conservative members of the community had witnessed undeniable evidence of her medical expertise. Sheriff Holt rose from his seat, his daughter Emma healthy and vibrant beside him. I've sent word to St. Louis that their fugitive died in the mountains last winter. As far as the law is concerned, Zara Bell no longer exists. But Dr. something I never dared hope for. The opportunity to practice medicine openly and help people without fear. The formal ceremony took place the following week. Calum stood beside her as she was sworn in, his pride evident to everyone present. Their partnership had evolved far beyond the desperate bargain struck during that first blizzard. They had become true equals, each contributing essential skills to their shared mission of healing. The medical practice they established operated from a converted building on Main Street, with living quarters attached for emergencies. Zara's medical expertise, combined with Calum's organizational abilities, created the most efficient healthcare system the territory had ever seen. Their success attracted attention from across the region. Other doctors began consulting with Zara on difficult cases, seeking her input on surgical procedures and treatment protocols. Her reputation spread through professional networks, earning respect that transcended racial boundaries within the medical community. The wedding ceremony took place on a Sunday morning in late spring, officiated by the town preacher and attended by nearly every resident of Cedar Ridge. Emma Holt served as flower girl, scattering petals down the church aisle with the enthusiasm of a child celebrating her own recovery. Zara wore a dress of ivory silk that complemented her dark skin beautifully. Calum stood tall beside her in his best suit, his military bearing softened by genuine happiness. They exchanged vows that spoke of partnership, mutual respect, and shared dedication to serving their community. The reception featured a feast prepared by grateful families, each dish representing a life touched by Zara's healing touch. Children she had treated from various ailments played games in the churchyard, while their parents shared stories of miraculous recoveries and expert care. As evening approached, the newlyweds returned to their ranch, now transformed into both home and satellite medical facility. Zara had established treatment stations throughout the territory, enabling her to serve remote families who couldn't travel to town for care. Calum managed the business aspects of her practice, scheduling appointments, maintaining supply inventories, and coordinating with other healthcare providers. His military experience proved invaluable in organizing efficient systems that maximized Zara's time and effectiveness. Their first major test as a married couple came. Her teaching abilities matched her surgical skills, inspiring others to pursue medical knowledge. The ranch itself became a symbol of possibility and progress. Visitors from other territories came to witness the unprecedented integration of a fully qualified African-American physician into a frontier community. Some came as skeptics, but left as believers, spreading word of Cedar Ridge's innovative approach to healthcare. On a warm evening in late summer, exactly 2 years after Zara's desperate arrival at Calum's door, they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors. A rider approached from the direction of town, carrying news of another family in need of medical attention. Zara gathered her medical bag while Calum prepared their horses. They rode out together toward whatever emergency awaited, their partnership stronger than ever. Behind them, the ranch stood ready to welcome anyone seeking healing, just as it had welcomed a desperate woman fleeing through a blizzard. The desperate plea that had brought them together had transformed into a promise fulfilled. Cedar Ridge had found its healer, and she had found her home.